Welcome to the Kitsap Matters podcast. In each episode, we discuss the people, places, and things that make Kitsap County unique, covering local entertainment, restaurants, business, government, and anything else we find interesting, troubling, or just plain amusing. A brief disclosure, this is a community-focused podcast, not a financial podcast, but sometimes financial topics do arise. And since the host is a licensed financial professional, we have to include the following disclosure in every episode. The strategies and concepts discussed are for educational purposes only and do not represent specific investment, tax, or estate planning advice. Investing carries an inherent element of risk, and it's in everyone's best interest to consult a tax, legal, or investment professional. Kevin Campbell is an investment representative of, and advisory services are offered through USA Financial Securities Corporation, a registered investment advisor located at 6020 East Fulton Street, Ada, Michigan, 49301. Peaks Financial is not affiliated with USA Financial Securities Corporation. Hi, you're listening to the Kitsap Matters podcast. I'm Kevin Campbell. I'm here today with my co-host, Christine Campbell.
Hey.
And we're excited to have John Ackenhusen with us today on the show. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
So now, if you're familiar with Peaks Financial, you've probably heard of our sale formula. This process is all about the key parts of our planning philosophy, with the first four letters of formula, FORM, representing family, occupation, recreation, and money. It's all about what matters most and what you can control. What's fun about our planning approach is that it also provides a great outline for interviews like this. So today we're diving into John's story and what matters to him. So let's jump right in and get started. John, again, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
So when we were getting ready for the show, John, you sent over your resume, and I got to say that the show is only about a half hour long, so I don't think I can read the whole thing. But obviously, so we know you from Rotary, and also as one of the people at Jewelbox Theatres, who does a lot there. But obviously, in your pre-retirement world was quite something else, right? Head of Systems Engineering Department at Bell Labs. Developing high-speed computers from speech recognition at Bell Labs, high-speed computers for image recognition at General Dynamics, and on and on. And then, but one of the things I thought was most impressive was that you earned 5 degrees in 6.5 years from the University of Michigan, including a PhD in plasma physics, MS and BS in physics, MSc, BSc in nuclear engineering. So you don't like sleep?
Well, I try to.
That is seriously impressive, and then obviously quite the career after your time at University of Michigan, and then obviously arts, and so that's where we know you're from, is the world of arts, and or from Rotary as well. But so again, well, thanks for being on the show, and super impressive background, and currently serving as the president of Jewelbox Theatres.
That's correct.
As well, correct?
That's right.
Awesome.
So, I love Jewelbox.
Jewelbox is great. If you're not familiar with Jewelbox Theatre, it's in Poulsbo, Washington, and you should check it out. They have great productions that are a lot of fun. It's a wonderful community theater, and our tech over here right now, Lindsay, also doubles as a tech at Jewelbox Theatre.
Yay!
Yeah. One of the unseen.
One of the unseen.
Oh, she's going to be seen. There's a wonderful production that puts her right on the stage with all the actors.
Right.
Perfect.
So, John, tell us a little bit about you and kind of your story.
Well, I guess if I had to say it in a short phrase, I would say I revel at the intersection of technology and arts. So even before I went to college, I couldn't decide if I wanted to be a music major or if I wanted to be an engineer. And I finally decided, well, sort of a least risk approach, maybe you're familiar with that in financial planning. I decided, well, if I wasn't going to be absolutely excellent, I would do better as an so-so engineer than I would as a so-so musician. So I went into engineering. And I did, I think, reasonably well there. I ended up, as you noticed, working in another intersection, the intersection of computers and people, working in speech recognition, trying to get computers to understand the way people can understand. Some of that got me into systems engineering for the Navy Standard Signal Processor. That was the systems engineering work that you mentioned. But all the time I'd been involved with music and a little bit with theater. In fact, it was theater that sort of changed my life back in high school, because I was originally a very bashful person, and I loved music. And sometimes when you love something, you want to get closer and closer to it. You don't just want to hear the music, you want to perform it. You don't just want to perform it, you want to perform it for others. But if you're bashful, now that's sort of a dichotomy, isn't it?
Right.
So I got over that finally by being selected for a musical and having to stand on the stage and sing in front of people. And that sort of got me over that hump, and that's helped me through all of my life, technical and artistic.
Having seen you in public burst into song,
Oh, absolutely! I would never.
I would
do
say
that
that bashful is
50 years ago.
not bashful does not seem to come to the top of the list.
Right.
Yeah, I gotta say, I feel like I'm in great company now because for years, our kids or friends would be kind of have a joke going like, "Oh my God, those Campbells, they just start singing for like no reason at all, just because you hear a lyric or somebody says something and it takes you right into a song, so you have to start singing it
Right.
because that's what we do." I'm so glad we're not the only ones.
Absolutely not. But it sort of surprises people. It's like sending someone an actual letter in the mail with a stamp. They don't know what to do anymore. You start singing. Oh, what's wrong with her?
Yeah. So what brought you to Poulsbo? What about, tell me, how did you, because I see Michigan all over the place.
Right,
I don't
Michigan
see a
all
lot
over
of
the place.
Washington.
Well, it's a very, very interesting story. My mother, we all grew up in West Virginia, but we had strong roots in Michigan. My mother and father, when they were going to plan ahead for their future, decided they needed to be near their kids as they got older. Well, I was back in Michigan. They were in West Virginia, but we had, my two sisters were in this area, and so they decided, well, sisters are better caregivers if needed than sons anyway. So they came out here. Around 2015, my mother needed a hip replacement operation. My sister, who was nearby, was tied up other places, and I came from Michigan to be her patient advocate as she went through the hospital. Well, in doing that, I sat at her place in her retirement home in Country Meadows in Silverdale, if you know where that is. Mm-hmm. And I sat next to this most wonderful lady, and we started talking. And she knew my mother. I was taking my mother's place. We found we had common interests in music, common interests in goofy senses of humor. We had our same favorite song that we did in our respective choruses. And then eventually we found we even had the same birthday. Anyway, I ended up, long story short, coming back, proposing to her the following Valentine's Day.
Wow.
As a surprise. I told her I was back in Ann Arbor, that showed up on her doorstep, and we ended up getting married. We moved back to Ann Arbor for about 3 years because I was Rotary president at the Ann Arbor Rotary Club, and that's a 3-year commitment to do that. And then we both moved back here for good. Her family is all around here. My family has ended up all around here, not only my mother and sister, but also my other brother. So we have a lot of family here, although
great.
none of us started here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
I love
wonderful.
that.
What a great story.
Yeah, that is. It is amazing the serendipitousness of doors opening in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And now I don't know. Do you have kids, grandkids?
I have stepkids. I was married, as was my wife, for many, many years, 43 in my case, to my first wife, and she passed away due to vascular dementia, as did my wife's late husband. Married many years, passed away due to vascular dementia. So I have sets of kids from my first marriage and from my marriage now to Ruthie, and they're just part of the family and all wonderful, very creative, and just joys to have around.
Great. Any grandkids?
Grandkids, absolutely, yes, in both sets, yes.
Fabulous.
So when you think about the path that you chose when you were talking earlier about going engineering or music, was there anybody like a family member or anything like that that helped kind of guide your path?
Well, my dad was an engineer, and so that helped a lot. I was the oldest of the kids, so I couldn't say I had help from siblings, but my dad was an engineer. We grew up in a chemical engineering town of South Charleston, West Virginia. Union Carbide was the big company in that town at that time. So I grew up with an appreciation of that. So I think that was probably that, and the idea of what would I do okay if I didn't absolutely become excellent in. steered me toward engineering as a career with music as a hobby rather than the other way around.
So we've talked about, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, we kind of tend to follow a format of family, occupation, recreation, and then a little bit of money talk as well.
Spells form, doesn't it?
It does.
Wow.
Right. Crazy like that. So as you think about, so I'm going to ask a couple of occupation questions 2 different ways. So one, you have, because you had quite, obviously, again, quite the professional engineer career as an engineer, but now you also kind of have almost a second career running as the president of Jewelbox Theatres. It seems like that's almost a full-time job.
Well, it really almost is, but speaking in favor of retirement planning, if you plan your retirement, you get income that you can not have to worry about. So whether or not I do what I want to, whether or not I spend 40 or 50 hours a week at the Jewelbox Theatre and on its affairs, I still have money coming in. So in a way, it's like a job, because you work all the time and you think about it all the time, but you have the security of, well, if you suddenly are not doing it, you still have the funds coming in to live on.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't mean to imply any ways that Jewelbox was providing your...
Not at all. Not at all. It's a pure volunteer operation.
It's the other direction. Yeah. So
Yeah, that seems like a retirement gig that is a full-time retirement gig.
Well, it is.
Yeah, a full-time retirement
hobby.
hobby.
It's a lot of fun. It really is.
So... what do you think is, so I'm going to ask this question for both. When you were back in your professional career as an engineer, what was the most enjoyable part about doing that? And also the same thing with Jewelbox.
It's the same thing in both cases. Being around people that know more about something than I do. I love to learn from people who are better at what I'm trying to do than I am. It's not always the most pleasant. Like the bosses I enjoyed the most were not the ones that were the nicest to me. They were the ones that I would learn the most from. There's one in particular, a system engineering director that taught me a lot about system engineering. But he was very curmudgeonly, and a lot of people, including me sometimes, were sort of afraid of him. But then around the Jewelbox Theatre, I can do a little bit of each of nearly everything one has to do. But anyone who really does it is so much better than I am that I'm always learning how to do that particular thing from them, whether it's finance or tech things or acting or whatever.
How fun.
Yeah.
What's been the most challenging? And again, I'll ask the question on both, from the engineering standpoint and from the Jewelbox standpoint. What are the most challenging aspects of those?
Oh, that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. Trying to think with regard to career, probably focusing in and staying with something after you have learned what you can about it. You know, you do it for a certain amount of time, and then for me, the interest level goes down because I now sort of know how to do it. So keeping to do it because you're in the middle of a project and you can't back out, it's not hard, but it is a challenge. And I've not been really at the Jewelbox long enough to get to that point, but I can imagine a time in the future that what is now exciting and mysterious might become routine and known, and that would, I think, be a little bit of a challenge.
Right.
It makes sense, and I see that,
does.
and you can see that in almost anything. It's like when it becomes too familiar, even if it's just something you've always enjoyed, but you reach a level of mastery, it sometimes becomes less.
I've heard the statement, I'm happiest when I don't know what I'm doing.
That's great. That's great. So what
Good,
about...
then I'll love golf forever.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, I have to just watch us play to know that we have no idea what we're doing.
Right.
Exactly.
So speaking of, which is a great transition to recreation,
Right.
golf.
Yeah.
So what is it when you're not at Jewelbox? What else are you out enjoying?
I am an aspiring musician. I am almost always practicing the piano in particular. I'm not as good as a real pianist, but I absolutely enjoy it. Anything from classical music to jazz. And in fact, a big transition for me was after decades of playing classical music where you read what's on the page and you play what's there, just like you might read from a script and say what's there. I moved from classical to jazz piano with the help of a very good instructor. And there you just get a little bit of outline, just like you might have a bullet point on a page saying, tell me what you know about, I don't know, pork belly futures. But there's nothing more than that. And so getting from a very complete representation of music to very sparse representation of music, it's like changing from reciting a script to having a conversation.
I love jazz because you there are parameters, and as long as you stay within the parameters of what the piece dictates, then you are free to do whatever you'd like to do, however you feel, and bring in that interpretation, which makes it very personal.
It does.
And it also connects with people differently. I know some people with the more engineering type minds sometimes get a little bit nervous around that free, perceived freedom. But it is not as free as what you're hearing. I don't know. It's kind of hard to.
Well, I think
like that you have engineering and music.
One way I think of it, and when I took about 4 years of jazz instruction from a very good jazz pianist, I sort of collapsed what he taught me into 3 big posters that sit over my grand piano. One concerns what you do with your left hand. That's on the left side naturally. One concerns your right hand, and there's one in the middle that concerns both. But the one on the right hand is on the topic of, if you have certain chords, any song you have, you're probably going to stick pretty much to the chord pattern you're given, or at least something close to it. But on the right hand, what notes go with a particular chord or chord sequence? So that is the basis for when you start improvising and stop playing the melody that's written, but play another melody that sounds like it goes perfectly with the chords, but it's not the melody you started with, sort of an improvised melody. So, yeah, absolutely. There are parameters that you have to stay within, but you have a lot of freedom within those parameters.
Love it.
Yeah, we're big fans of music ourselves. Chris was a music major back in the day, and we love also we sponsored the Waterfront concert series this last summer down in Poulsbo, and Poulsbo's got such a great live music scene.
And you are sponsoring the Poulsbo Blues and Jazz Festival, I know, too.
Yes, we are. Yep.
Yes.
Which I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Another great time for a plug here. Poulsbo Blues and Jazz Festival. I think there's less than 200 tickets remaining.
That's limited because it's limited to the size of the venues. And just to tell you another interest of mine, when I first saw the abbreviation PB&J, I'm a fan of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Me too.
For decades working at Bell Laboratories, I would always have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my lunch. And then eventually I got efficient and kept the peanut butter and the jam and the bread in my file cabinet and would make them on the spot.
That's
there
awesome.
You go.
I love PB&J too.
Yeah, peanut butter and jelly, and also Poulsbo Blues and Jazz Festival,
and that's
which is going to be
right now.
February
24th of February, yes.
February 24th.
2/24/24.
Yep.
With a little gathering the day before at Rock and Ruby's Records, which is sort of a send-off or a get-started festival.
This is going to be, it looks to be an epic event. The lineup is great. I think it's basically almost every venue in downtown Poulsbo is going to have live bands going in at that night.
And just to tell you how good it is, I offered to play my kazoo, and they rejected me. So you know it's going to be good.
So as we talk about money, shifting from recreation to money, who've had the biggest influences in your life from a financial aspect?
I would think my mother did. In fact, she's still alive at 95. As I mentioned, in Country Meadows in Silverdale. But she grew up first working for the Office of Price Stabilization that sprung up at the end of World War II when prices were way out of control. She went on to become an economist. She opened a tax return business, a tax return preparation business, which had the very clever name of Many Happy Returns. When we kids were growing up, we had to
That's
keep a ledger.
That's not what most people think of when they talk about tax returns as happy returns.
Well, she had a lot of repeat customers, but we grew up accounting for our funds, our allowance. What did you spend it on? We had audits, or at least reviews, before we got our next allowance. How are you spending your money? So she was also the financial chairman for a large sorority, Alpha Chi Omega, for a large number of states. She worked as a treasurer of Black Diamond Girl Scout Council. And so, anyway, I think that probably gave me the most awareness and thinking of money.
Good.
What do you, when you think about like the financial services world, what should the financial services world be doing better? What should they be doing different or better?
I think the thing that I value the most, because I've used several financial services, and the things that I end up treasuring, the one that I treasure for what I have, is the ability to walk with you, to understand your needs, to explain what they propose as to why that helps you with your needs, to share every step of the way. This is a different thing than, let's say, having the very best financial return you can possibly get. That's not part of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who explains what they do and recognizes my particular situation. Some do that very well. Some take a cookie cutter approach and don't do that at all.
Yeah. I've seen some cookie cutter approaches.
Yeah, we have. There's quite a few out there, and I think there's understanding the difference as well. There are a lot of, when you say financial advisor, that means a lot of things to a lot of people. And in our world, there are people who are, they would be, and they're technically correct, they are financial advisors, but they're really just investment advisors. And that's where when we talk to people and we'll ask, well, you already have a financial advisor. Well, how are they helping you with this problem? They'll say, well, that's not really what they do. They just manage my old IRA or my old 401k or something like that. And so, okay, that's an investment advisor, not necessarily a financial advisor who's helping with the whole overall financial picture. And that's really what I think most people need, is really more like almost the financial CFO to help, as you said, walk the path with them.
Right. And indeed, the particular ones we have right now reach out to that. They have various organizations. I don't know if they're under contract to them or they hire that out or whatever, but they will take you through a life plan and stretch way beyond trying to get a great interest rate or on your investment or something like that. What are your goals? What do you worry about in your health situation? What's your upcoming needs? What do you like to do when you are not doing things you have to do? And which of those things cost money, and when might it cost it that? So anyway, yes.
And what rate of return is important. It's the kind of the engine that drives the car for a lot of people's wealth management, especially for the generations that don't have pensions.
Right.
It's an important aspect, but it's certainly not the only aspect. There's a lot of others that go along with it. So awesome. So a couple of last questions. What's the best kept secret in Kitsap County?
Other than Jewelbox.
Right? And this is like what if somebody comes to Kitsap, they come to visit you or something like that. What's something that that you would take them to, and especially something that, if you can think of anything that many people in Kitsap wouldn't know about?
I think the history of Kitsap is very interesting. The way it started as a Norwegian, actually started out as a lumber place. A fellow, Paul Wall, would dump his lumber on what is now Liberty Bay, was Dogfish Bay. A place there became known as Paul's Place. That's where he'd dump his lumber. Then there's the other aspect that there were some Norwegian immigrants that came from a familiar place in Norway called Paulsbo, Paulsbo. They decided they were going to call this place Paulsbo. They got excited. A postmaster general received their application for a post office, and they were so excited they were writing frantically, and the O that we now have in Paulsbo used to be the A of the original Paulsbo because of a misreading in handwriting. But then there's also some interesting turns you can take with that history. You are on Hostmark Street. That's where your office is. Adolf Hostmark was one of the first immigrants to Paulsbo that did not go through the Midwest first. A lot of Norwegian immigrants came to the Midwest, and then they decided there's no fjords, there's no hills here, it's flat, let's go somewhere else, and they would come here. But Hostmark came here directly, and in my mind, my fantasy, in his ship, he had some trolls that stowed away, and those trolls escaped, and those trolls to this day bring mischief upon Paulsbo. It was the trolls who got up there and changed that A to an O on the post office. And it's all, if you know where to look, those buildings that you don't know what's going in, the trolls have to stay out of the light. But anyway, that part of Paulsbo I think is interesting.
That's fascinating.
No kidding,
That's
right?
awesome. So, so tell us what's going on at Jewelbox as well, because I'm sure you want to talk about what's coming up, what are the shows coming up, what's happening at Jewelbox.
One of the things we are so fortunate to have at Jewelbox is our artistic director, Michelle Peterson, who grew up with the building 23 years ago, just about. She was involved with the Jewelbox. She has a wonderful She calls it a menu. She's a chef planning a dinner, and the menu needs to have a little bit of spicy, a little bit of salty, a little bit of sweet, a little bit of savory, a little old, a little new, a little music, a little drama. And she only has 6 onstage plays to do that with. She does it so fabulously. Our last play was a very funny play, Savannah Sipping Society.
That was great. We saw it. It was fantastic.
Right now, it's a thought-provoking play that just closed day before yesterday called Doubt, questioning belief and questioning what you think is evidence. Does it really show what you think it does? This involved the church. Coming up next is annual classic, Radio on the Air. Let's put you in the radio studio that's broadcasting out to the air. It's KJBT Radio, K Jewelbox Theatre Radio. A set will be on, will be that radio thing. There's about 10 actors, including Lindsay, doing sound effects on the stage, not behind the screens. Following that, we're going to have a real stretch for us. We are bringing in the Addams Family musical of the Addams Family. It's a much larger, much more expensive, much more current show than we typically do. And it was through the help of our sponsors and donors at our last gala last March that gave us the extra money to do this. Turns out the orchestrations on it are done by Larry Hochman, who's somebody I've worked with in the past musically as well, but that was sort of a surprise. I didn't realize that when we started doing this. But anyway, it has a cast of 28. There were 40 auditions. Wow. There's going to be 2 sets of people doing many of the roles. We're worrying right now about where to put them. We're being told we have to take things out of the office and the green room and all this other stuff. So that's next. Following that is Chapter 2, one about finding love later in life, sort of like the story I was telling about my wife Ruthie and me, a Neil Simon play. And then finally after that, we close the season with Witness for the Prosecution, where the Justice Jeffrey Bassett, a local judge around here, is serving as director. And you may be sure that the accuracy of the courtroom scenes and the legal processes will be spot on.
Awesome.
That sounds great.
Excellent.
I do really enjoy the performances at Jewelbox.
Jewelbox is a great, it is a wonderful gem of the community. It's fantastic. So, and then, so our last question, Chris always gets the last question, and it's always a surprise.
Okay.
It is.
Especially to Chris.
No, because it's always the same question that I get to ask. And now, if you are familiar with this podcast, you know the question that I'm going to ask next. If you were to produce a reality TV show, what would it be called, and what would be the premise?
A reality TV show, let's think about that. Does that meaning a historical account of something, or does that mean putting everybody on an island to see who gets voted off?
Depends on what you choose.
Okay. Well, one of the aspects that is under the founding of the Jewelbox Theatre is real life in imaginary circumstances. That's what we try to bring, real life in imaginary circumstances. And that history of Paulsbo I was telling you about, there's some fact in there, but then when you start talking about those trolls, you get some imaginary circumstances as well. So if I were doing a reality show, it would be a representation of the history of Paulsbo with the mystery that is not that far from your mind, that can explain some of the unusual things that we have right here.
That would be a show I would watch.
That would be cool.
Good.
Yeah, that would definitely be a show I'd watch. Thank you so much.
John, thanks so much for being on the podcast with us today.
It would be called Paulsbo Plays.
Oh, yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. I almost forgot what we would call it, Paulsbo Plays.
Paulsbo Plays, that'd be great.
Paulsbo Plays.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. John, again, thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate being here.
Thank
and we
you
will
for
see
having
you
me.
at Jewelbox Theatre.
Great. Look forward to seeing you.
All right.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Kitsap Matters podcast. A brief disclosure, this is a community-focused podcast, not a financial podcast, but sometimes financial topics do arise. And since the host is a licensed financial professional, we have to include the following disclosure in every episode. The strategies and concepts discussed are for educational purposes only and do not represent specific investment, tax, or estate planning advice. Investing carries an inherent element of risk, and it's in everyone's best interest to consult a tax, legal, or investment professional. Kevin Campbell is an investment representative of, and advisory services are offered through USA Financial Securities Corporation, a registered investment advisor located at 6020 East Fulton Street, Ada, Michigan, 49301. Peaks Financial is not affiliated with USA Financial Securities Corporation.